verses 2 through 3. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And the thing that I want us to realize tonight is how are we going to maintain that unity that it's talking about, that unity of the Spirit and of the bond of peace. But to first understand it, we have to understand what it's supposed to look like. One story that gets so overlooked in the Bible is the story of Nehemiah. Some background context on Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a Jewish exile who was the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes of the Persians. Nehemiah had gotten word that the wall of their homeland, Jerusalem, was almost completely destroyed, and this made Nehemiah very upset. But with his great trust in the king, he was granted access to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild this wall. He would become the governor of Jerusalem and become the biggest factor in rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. And besides the many things that this story highlights, it highlights great leadership, how to keep a great mindset in our lives, and the great selflessness of Nehemiah through this. But you may ask, how does this apply to unity? If you would, flip over to Nehemiah chapter 4. We're going to be reading some verses from there. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 8 through 9, it says, "And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night." And the thing about this story is, even though Nehemiah was going out to do this great deed for all the people, he was very hated by the other nations. The other nations didn't want Nehemiah to be able to do this. And so the people had to be scared. They were being threatened constantly by the people of the other nations. But the thing about these people under Nehemiah's leadership, they didn't stop working. They never ran away. Let's go over to verses 15 through 18. It says, "When our enemies heard that it was known to us, and that God had frustrated their plan, and we all returned to the wall, each to his work, from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held the weapon in the other." And that is a great example that we all can use for unity. A group of people that comes together, that looks at the things that is set before them, knowing that what they're about to do is going to be difficult, knowing it's going to be hard, knowing that it wasn't going to be convenient for them in the first place to even do it, and knowing that they didn't have to do anything if they didn't want to. But knowing that together as a group, if they came together, they could do something greater and not just do nothing. And that is unity. And something I want to ask you tonight is, are you unified to the right things? Or are you unified to the wrong things? Because we're supposed to be the people that has one hand working and the other hand is holding the weapon. And not the ones who run when our lives start to get difficult. There's so many opportunities to do good in this life, and one bad decision can completely alter it. Now, these bad decisions, these life-altering decisions don't just pop up in our lives. They come from one mistake that happened in the first place. And this one mistake kept building and building until it finally reached this point. But there is so much opportunity to put ourselves in the good situations instead, to run away from the bad situations. In this life, we have so many challenges, we have so many different circumstances, we have so many different decisions. But the limit to us succeeding in this life for God, the only person that is limiting what you do is yourself, and only yourself. And we need to think about that. We have to ask ourselves, what decisions are we going to start with? In Philippians chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, "Complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind." Same love, full of accord, and of one mind. This entire section of this chapter, in verses 1 through 11, highlight the greatest example of love, humility, and so much more. And what's great about these verses is that it highlights the image of the only perfect person that ever lived, the perfect example that we could ask for. So we know that we're looking at the right person. Flip over to verses 5 through 7. It says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Something that we don't realize a lot, something that we don't acknowledge, is that Jesus left a perfect life. Jesus left the life that we should all be striving for. Jesus left the most peaceful, the most calm, and such a great place that we can't even imagine how good that it was. And most of all, Jesus left a perfect life to become a servant. Not to destroy mankind, which we deserved. Not to rule over the earth, which wouldn't have even been better than where he was at in the first place, being with God. But Jesus left to be born at Bethlehem, to be born of his virgin mother Mary, to start in carpentry before his ministry, to heal the sick, to work so many miracles, and to prepare others to teach the good news, to complete every single prophecy that would ever be made about him throughout the entire Old Testament. And then we have one prophecy in particular. If you would, flip to Isaiah chapter 53. We're going to read this section. It says, "Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord was laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth." When we read that text, a lot of times for the Lord's Supper, how much are we thinking about the words here? Yet, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was despised. Do you ever get that feeling whenever in life someone is so kind to you, someone is so nice to you, that you just start feeling guilty? This is one of those moments. This is one of those moments where we can't do anything to repay him. But he did it anyway. In Luke chapter 22, it talks about how Jesus' sweat became his blood. You know how much agony that you have to be in for your sweat to become like blood? Jesus left perfection to be mocked, to be beaten, to be whipped, to be spat upon, to have nails driven through his wrists and feet, to go through so much pain throughout his life, to have so much hate turned towards him, to have so many different encounters where somebody did not like him. But Jesus left perfection to do this, to become a servant. And then finally, at the end of all of it, to be crucified for you, to do exactly the only thing that we could have needed to have salvation, even when we didn't deserve it. And in our Christian lives, I don't think we realize something sometimes. When things start to get hard in our lives, we want to give up pretty easily. We want it easy. We want to complain. All we want to do is just give up. And after all these mistakes that we make throughout life, and what do? After each and every mistake that you make, what do you expect? You expect a second chance. But when we look at all of our situations throughout life, when we look at every single circumstance, we have to look at ourselves and realize, did we even deserve the first? Jesus tells Peter in Matthew chapter 26 that God could send him more than 12 legions of angels, a legion being about 6,000 in the Bible, To put this into perspective, throughout the entire Bible, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is referenced back in Genesis when Lot was and his wife and they had to run away. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's known throughout the Bible because of how great the sin of God's people was and how great the destruction was that was caused by it. That was 2 angels, not 2,000, 2 angels. And God has more than 72,000, according to Matthew chapter 26, that he could send in an instant. Through all of this pain, through all this suffering, through all this mocking, through all this beating, one word, and it could have all been over. He wouldn't have had to live with it anymore. He could have chosen what we actually deserved. And in church sometimes, we end up singing the song 10,000 Angels sometimes. And the line that always just hits more than everything else, right before we take the Lord's Supper, he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. He could have called 10,000 angels, but he died alone for you and me. Not with everybody else, but alone. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 2 through 3. A perfect explanation of the perfect person. With this story that we hear so many times about Jesus and what he did for us, I go back to when I was younger. I like to go back and think all the way back to the nursery class, back to the 2- and 3-year-old class. I think about the songs that we used to sing that told us about Jesus, all of these separate things. And the one song that always seems to come back to mind is the Crayon song. Red is the color for the blood that he shed. Brown is for the crown of thorns they placed upon his head. Blue is for the royalty which in him did dwell. And yellow for the Christian that's too afraid to tell. Are we willing to love? Something that I don't think we really think about when it comes to love is encouraging other people even when they're just doing their regular thing. Even when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Have you ever came into church and just told someone, hey, I'm glad I got to see you today. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you came today. And with the recent passing of Bill Dudney, something that I want to say about him was when it came to him and encouragement, he was the biggest encouraging person I've ever met in my life. He was the kind of person that you weren't looking for him, but he was looking for you. He was looking to say hi to you. He was looking for you to ask you how you were doing. He encouraged better than anyone I have ever met in my life. And he did so much for me. And the encouraging, it even goes farther. If we aren't encouraging to the everyday Christian how we're supposed to be doing, how do we expect to be encouraging the ones that are trying to be better? How are we, the people that are actually willing to make that change, the people that are wanting to turn their lives around, they're not getting their encouragement. The people who are actually trying to be better. And when they expect a warm welcome from God's people, the church, the people who are supposed to be Christians, they just get turned away. And why is that? Because people aren't willing to put themselves below anyone else for any circumstance whatsoever. There's no encouragement. We have to be encouraging as godly people. And it goes farther than you think it will. There's going to be a day when the people that warned you about your decisions are going to be the ones that are in the place where you wanted to be. They're going to be with God. They're going to be in the exact place where you were striving for. But your decisions got in the way. They're going to be the ones that are with Jesus. Our biggest fear in life should be missing heaven when we always had the chance to turn back around. We can't be late. Our minds can't comprehend eternity, but something I can comprehend is eternity in hell is not where we want to be. Eternity is a long time, longer than anything that we can grasp. Don't spend it in the wrong place. Let's be united. Let's strive for heaven together. Where are your decisions taking you in life? Are you struggling with unity? Are you struggling with love? Right now is the perfect chance to turn around. Right now is the chance to turn around and go in the opposite direction. But the thing about the opposite direction, you can go two separate ways. You can go the right way or you can go the wrong way. When you're turning around, choose the right direction.